The conference chamber aboard the Eternal Accord hummed with a silence that felt older than stars. High Chancellor Zareth stood at the center of the circular hall, his four-fingered hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the holotable. Around him, delegates from 47 civilizations watched with wide, unblinking eyes, species that had sailed the stars for millennia, cultures that had mapped nebulae before Earth's oceans had cooled. They were the Galactic Conclave. They were ancient. Or so they had believed. "Play it again," Zareth said, his voice barely above a whisper. The holographic display bloomed to life once more. A blue-green planet rotated slowly in the center of the room, unremarkable at first glance. Third rock from a yellow dwarf. Thin atmosphere. Mostly water. Then the data streams began. Carbon-based lifeforms, confirmed. Bipedal locomotion, confirmed. Tool use, confirmed. Civilization markers, confirmed. Estimated age of dominant species, calculating. The number that appeared made 3 delegates faint. 847,000 years. Admiral Darian Voss had been watching them from the observation deck above the main chamber for 20 minutes. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, expression unreadable, her silver-streaked hair pulled tight against her skull in the style of the old Earth Naval Command. She had read the Conclave's sealed intelligence files 2 days ago, files they didn't know she had access to. She knew what they had found. She knew what it meant to them. She also knew something they didn't. They had barely scratched the surface. Commander Yael Rin stepped up beside her, keeping his voice low. "They've just reached the population data, Admiral." "I know," Voss said. Below, Zareth was gripping the table hard enough that his knuckles had gone pale violet. The population estimates for humanity, not just on Earth, but across its colonies, its outposts, its deep space stations, scrolled across the display in cascading numbers. Trillions. Spread across 400 star systems, with tendrils reaching into regions the Conclave had marked on their oldest charts as uninhabited void. Uninhabited. Voss allowed herself a small, private smile. "When do we go in?" Rin asked. "When Zareth asks the right question," she said. "He's getting close." Down in the chamber, Zareth pressed his palms flat on the table and looked at the data stream with the expression of a man watching the floor drop away beneath him. "This cannot be accurate," said Delegate Thurin of the Cavith Union, her bioluminescent crest flickering with agitation. "The humans have only held a seat in the Conclave for 300 years. They arrived with generation ships. We observed them. They were primitive, they were young. We observed what they showed us," said another voice, quiet, measured, from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned. Admiral Darian Voss walked down the steps into the main floor with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere better to be and nothing left to prove. She was alone. No guards, no escort. Just a woman in a dark uniform with 7 stars on her collar, walking into a room full of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy as though she had been invited for tea. "Admiral Voss," Zareth said carefully. "This session was classified." "Chancellor," she replied, stopping at the edge of the holotable opposite him, "most of what humanity does is classified. You're only now beginning to understand how much." A ripple of unease moved through the assembled delegates like wind through tall grass. Zareth studied her. In his centuries of diplomacy, he had learned to read species by their micro-expressions, their body language, their biochemical stress markers. Humans were notoriously difficult to read, their faces were expressive to the point of chaos, and yet somehow this woman showed him nothing at all. A perfect blank. Trained, he realized. Trained to show nothing. "The archaeological data," he said slowly, "suggests that your species has had spacefaring capability for at least 600,000 years," Voss said. "Give or take. The records get complicated around the Tethys event." 600, Thurin's crest went dark entirely. "The Tethys event," Zareth repeated. He knew that name. Every civilization in the conclave knew that name. It was the great galactic catastrophe that had ended the era of the precursors, the mythological ancient race that had supposedly seeded life across hundreds of worlds, then vanished without explanation. The conclave had spent 4,000 years searching for their ruins. They had found fragments, impossible structures, technology that defied understanding, a language encoded in the base pairs of 100 different species' DNA. The precursors, Zareth said. The word fell out of him like a stone. Voss tilted her head slightly. We prefer founders. Precursors sounds a bit ominous, honestly. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes geological events. Zareth could not finish the sentence. The mathematics of it were crushing him in real time. If humanity had been present during the Tethys event, if they had survived the Tethys event, then every assumption the conclave had ever made about the shape of history was wrong. The species they had welcomed 3 centuries ago as eager, bright-eyed newcomers, the ones they had quietly pitted for arriving in generation ships, of all things, so charmingly primitive, had been watching them since before their own civilizations had learned to count. The generation ships, he said. That was theater, Voss said pleasantly. We didn't want to overwhelm anyone. The conclave was young then. Relatively speaking. Young. Thurin's voice was hollow. We are 4,000 years old. Yes. Voss looked at her with genuine warmth. You've done remarkably well. The briefing that followed lasted 9 hours. Voss walked them through it methodically, without drama or condescension. She had been briefed to be kind about it. Humanity had spent a long time deciding how and when to reveal itself, and the consensus had been gently. The conclave had enough of a shock already. She explained the Tethys event, not a catastrophe, but a choice. Humanity had watched its early seeded civilizations begin to develop, and had recognized a truth that took most species millions of years to learn, that presence corrupts. That a parent who never leaves the room raises children who never learn to stand. And so they had pulled back. Destroyed their most visible infrastructure. Hidden their records in the one place no one would think to look, the genetic code of the very species they had helped bring to consciousness. She explained the monitoring. Centuries of quiet observation, careful intervention where extinction threatened, deliberate non-interference everywhere else. She explained the other conclave, the one that had existed for 400,000 years, the one humanity had built and maintained and eventually allowed to fade when it became clear that younger species needed the room to build their own. She explained, with some delicacy, that approximately 60% of the conclave's most treasured technological discoveries had been nudged into existence by anonymous human researchers working under assumed identities, because watching civilizations struggle with problems humanity had solved 300 millennia ago had occasionally been more than their scientists could bear. Delegate Thurin was crying by hour 4. She couldn't help it. Her people had a cultural legend, the unseen shepherds, a mythological race of beings who watched over the galaxy in secret. Every child of the Kavath Union heard that story. Every child believed, and then grew up, and stopped believing. The shepherds, she managed. That was you. Voss looked at her with something that might have been fondness. We were never supposed to make it into the mythology. That was an accident. We apologize for any existential distress. Zareth found Voss afterward, standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. He stood beside her for a long moment without speaking. Why now? He finally asked. Why reveal this now? Voss was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost its diplomatic precision. She sounded, for the first time, tired, the way very old things sometimes sound when they finally stop pretending. Because something is coming, she said. Something old. Older than us even, we think. We've been tracking it for 11,000 years and we still don't fully understand it. She turned to look at him, and for a moment Zareth saw in her eyes the weight of an age he couldn't comprehend. We can't face it alone. And we don't want to. Zareth looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was wider and stranger and more ancient than anything his civilization had ever dared to imagine. He thought about everything he had learned today. About the species he had pitted. About the shepherds. About the quiet, patient, impossible wait of 847,000 years. What do you need from us? He asked. Voss turned back to the stars. Stand beside us, she said. That's all we've ever wanted.